Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural webinar of our monthly webinar series about open knowledge in the US. Today, we'll be talking about what is open knowledge US, if we can go to the next slide, and WPRDC. So quickly, here's the agenda. We'll briefly introduce the panelists and discuss specifically what is this thing we're calling the US Open Knowledge Network. And we have as our guest Oscar Montiel from Open Knowledge International to give us an overview. And then after that, we'll have the WPRDC team giving an overview of the great work they're doing in Allegheny County, Western Pennsylvania. And we'll have we're reserving a lot of time for Q&A, so this will be more conversational. If you have any questions, if we go to the next slide, please. You can enter your questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, but feel free to raise your hand and we'll take note of them and be sure to ask them during the Q&A. And also, if you're having problems with GoToWebinar, here are some tips in there. It should be fairly straightforward. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. Quick round of introductions. So first, let me hand it off to Bert, who's been looking after the US Open Knowledge Network the past few years. Bert?
Well, thanks, Joel. So, I've been involved with Open Knowledge prior to 2014, as the one of the U.S. ambassadors, and was able to get to meet a lot of people as a result of the Open Knowledge Festival that took place in Berlin in 2014, and really wanted to see if there were ways to galvanize the open knowledge activity in the U.S. given the fact that the U.S. is a pretty big country, and one of the big things that I wanted to try to establish is just the fact that we're out here in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, pretty much on the far western side of the U.S., and wanted to play an active role in not only in the U.S. but perhaps more locally in the Pacific region. And given the fact that there's activities like the festival that happens in places like Berlin, which is basically 11, 12 hours away, time zone wise, I mean, how could we do something similar to that, here in Hawaii? So anyway, I tried to, stay connected with the open knowledge folks, look at the different activities that were going on, and then also try to look at sort of rebooting the U.S. chapter. And as a result, just try to connect with the different ambassadors, and many of them were sort of in dormant mode. So I just sort of kept the lights on and stayed on the page with the open knowledge folks. Was an active, kept sort of in active contact with some of the different players, and obviously the players a lot of them have changed as well. So I just tried to be sort of a stable presence on the open knowledge page, and just anecdotally, one of the things that just recently happened was that I got invited to go to Tunisia to talk about open data to the government and some of the municipalities there, and that was a result of my presence on the Open Knowledge Foundation page. So that was a direct benefit of being involved with open knowledge. So anyway, that's kind of a brief overview of my involvement with open knowledge. And from a Hawaii standpoint, I'm executive director of Hawaii Open Data, and we're very much grassroots here in Hawaii, trying to push on open data and trying to get citizen programmers and coders involved with various kinds of hackathons, and we've done a bunch of code challenges and hackathons. It's really driving kind of the collaboration between citizens and government. So we've been very active on that front. So that's kind of my a little bit of my background.
Thank you, Bert, for that, and thank you for keeping the lights on. I'm Joel Natividad. I sit on the CCAN steering group, and I've been active in the CCAN project for the past oh God, 7 years almost, 6, 7 years. My day job is I'm Director of Open Data at OpenGov, helping a lot of governments across the U.S. do open data without having to learn CCAN, and they can focus on the hard work of opening data, translating it into open knowledge. So with that, I'll quickly introduce our speakers. If we can go to the next slide. We're graced today by a lot of great folks. We have Oscar Montiel. We'll have his intro during his section of the presentation, representing Open Knowledge International. And we have the WPRDC team headed by Bob Gradeck, and Steve, along with Steve and David. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and by the way, a little nugget. I used their Twitter, if we can go back quickly. That's Bob's actual appearance. His Twitter avatar was his dog wearing his glasses. So anyway, so why US Open Knowledge Network? Like Bert referred to, the US is a big country. It spans 6 time zones, if you include Arizona, and we're not even including Guam and all the other territories. So it's big. And before Bert was based, he was based in Hawaii, so he couldn't really get involved in and engage the community at large. So what we want to do is really give a forum for the community to congregate and have these conversations. Also, we want to build capacity. Open Knowledge is a lot of great open source projects, among which CCAN. And one feedback we often get from the community is it is the leading open source data management platform, but it seems that the community is heavily weighted towards Europe, where it began. So we want to correct that and activate and build that capacity so people can actually work with the data once the government start publishing them, using the API, contributing extensions, and all that good stuff. And lastly, since we don't want to reinvent the wheel, a lot of good conversations and innovations are already happening around the world. We want to connect with the community and facilitate that. And that's why we're doing this. So, and one thing we're doing, if we go to the next slide, to facilitate this process is we're not just going to depend on mailing lists and online presence. One thing that we'll do, I think going forward, we'll have monthly webinar series where we'll feature all these open knowledge, open data stories coming from pioneers and innovators here in the US. And we'll start doing more community engagement in the existing OKFN discussion board. And we'll have, thanks to Oscar, he created a US chapter section there. We'll start populating that. And we'll find opportunities to meet face-to-face with the community. The US is really such a big country. And there are several conferences around the country that we want to engage with the community and talk to them where they are. And as you know, there are a lot of people working at this problem. Pioneers like Code for America, Sunlight Foundation, John Hopkins, Harvard Kennedy. We want to link arms with them. I know Open Knowledge has collaborations with them already, and I'm a CFA Brigade member myself here in New York City. So we want to link arms with those other organizations and work together rather than work against each other or do things duplicative of what each other is doing. And we want to engage people from the community, especially if you're interested in open knowledge specific projects. So, we can do open data applied or open knowledge applied using specific technologies and tools that Open Knowledge has developed in its network. Let's go to the next slide. So with that, I'll hand it over to Oscar so he can talk more about what Open Knowledge is and all the great stuff they've been doing for the past 10 years. Oscar?
Thanks a lot, Joe. So hello, everyone. I'm Oscar Montiel. I'm the community coordinator for Open Knowledge International. So for those of you who, if we can pass to the next one. Open Knowledge is a nonprofit, so Open Knowledge International is itself a nonprofit of people that work on openness in different regards, especially open data, but there are many other issues around open knowledge that I'll mention in a few minutes. And building technology, we have mentioned already CCAN, but through these years we have built a series of software pieces that are open source and that rely on the use and adoption of a network to live. And in the end, what we want is enable people to work with data to generate knowledge, to balance the power structures, let's say, in the world, to see a more open world in general. And how do we do it? What do we do exactly to achieve this? If we can advance on the slide. We do this through different projects. The current projects you can see in the next slide, which is, well, we already mentioned CCAN, which is a piece of like a data repository that is open source and that can be deployed and redeployed in many places. It has a very big community of developers that have worked on building plugins, building the software itself, and a lot of companies are now working for profit with it, which is a great outcome for us. We also have something called the Global Open Data Index, which measures the state of open data across the world, especially for open government data with at a national level. Last year was the 4th year that we did that measurement. And it has given us some insights about not only how open a country can be, but also about what it means to have useful open data at a national level. And eventually, now we also have many different open data censuses across the world, measuring more the local or thematic openness of certain data sets. Open trials, it has changed now. We are no longer actively working on it, but it pretends to make all the medical trials data available on a single source. Then frictionless data, which is another big project for us right now, where we try to make data easier to use, because if you make all the data in the world available but no one uses it, it is actually probably not that open, right? So we want to make the use of data through simple rules and tools easier to access and process. Then open spending is our current fiscal project, where we are trying to make through a piece of software, the open spending tool, and the open fiscal data package, make the data about spending for different levels of government available for people. Then, of course, even if you have all the data out there and people don't know how to use them, then all the efforts would be pointless. So School of Data tries to bring data literacy to as many people as possible. It has become its own network. So now it's not only the School of Data Fellowship or the projects that come from OKI, but we have a very big network of different practitioners that have different projects around data literacy, in that exchange how how they do things, and in the end are joined by a common goal, which is having more people that know how to work with data around the world. Another project that is now dormant as part of OKI, but was at some point a really big project is OpenGLAM. This stands for Galleries, Libraries, Archives, and Museums. So it is very related to the work that, for example, Wikimedia does, providing open access to all the resources in these different knowledge centers, and allowing people to use them freely for whatever their purposes are. But as we have been speaking, we noticed that probably the easiest part to start with was open data. So maybe if you're new in all the open data subjects, I wanted to just quickly recommend another resource that we have, if we can go to the next slide, which is the Open Data Handbook. The address is opendatahandbook.org, where you can learn everything about open data. It's a very robust guide on what is open data, why open data, how to make, what actually is open data in legal terms or in technical terms. A couple value stories, which aren't exhaustive, but try to cover different projects that have been successful in some way in making or using open data, and a resource library where you can dig deeper into different subjects around open data. So coming back to the Open Knowledge US group, if we can go to the next slide. All the work we do, as I mentioned, we base it on a network. This is a decentralized network of like-minded organizations and groups that work all over the world. Right now, we have groups in more than 40 countries. And we know that open knowledge is not only open data or what you can do with open data, but as I mentioned, there's OpenGLAM. There's, for example, now the my data or personal data use. There are different topics that these groups cover that we know we can't cover by ourselves. So we base all this work on a network. And that's why we see it is important to take this work in the US. And BERT has done a really great job during these years, but we see now the opportunity to regain momentum and build a vibrant community as we know that we can have. So thank you everyone for being here and for your interest. And I think I can pass it on to Bob.
Nope, I got it. Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. Just quickly, thanks again for that overview. Before I pass to Bob, I just wanted to quickly have a few things to say about what's happening at WPRDC. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have been involved, when it first started a few years ago when I was still with Ontodia. And it's been really the exemplar for this whole concept of regional data centers. And I invite you, I'm showing just this article, and then if we go to the next slide, another more recent one from the Open Data Manager in Seattle about this whole concept and how it's been intriguing a lot of people. And in my day job, working with a lot of governments, I think this is something that people have been thinking about, and it's really appropriate that for the inaugural webinar, we have the WPRDC team to talk more about what they've done in Allegheny County. Bob?
Yeah, so with that, we'll take it away. So I'm Bob Gradeck. I manage the Regional Data Center Project, and I'm joined here today with Steve Saylor and David Walker. They'll say hi here in a second. So,
hi, I'm Steve Saylor, developer here. I mainly focus on like user-facing tools and front-end development.
I'm David Walker, also a developer here, and I've had an interest in data and making things for a long time, and this job allows me to do both of those things.
And so we're all employees at the University of Pittsburgh, and the project is actually a partnership of the university, Allegheny County, and the city of Pittsburgh. So just want to put that out there first. So we'll go to the next one. So we do things a little bit differently here. This is what open data looked like back when we were getting started. You had, a vendor get a big check from the mayor, and they would set up a repository, and then they'd pump a bunch of available data into that, and then that was open data. And so this is what it looked like, but it didn't necessarily work well for us here. And so in those cities, next slide, please. What would happen is the mayor would just check the open data box, and everybody would be happy, and there'd be a bunch of data that would get stale. But what we saw was the opportunity here is actually using this data to solve community problems. And with this fragmented as we are, we probably jump to the next slide. We are a community in Allegheny County alone, 1.2 million people, 130 different local government units or municipalities. The city of Pittsburgh is the largest, but we're only in the city about a quarter of the county's population. And so you throw on top of that 42 school districts and any other number of authorities and agencies, it's really hard to have any impact with public information with that level of fragmentation if your infrastructure doesn't actually take that into account. So what we try to do is build an inclusive open data infrastructure here. And that, you can see the existing publishers that we have up. I'll get into the different elements of our infrastructure, so technical, legal, the people that we have, and then the engagement infrastructure. But we have it so that we can add additional publishers who can then share data, and we're there to support them. So next. So the first piece of our infrastructure is really the legal infrastructure. So when we got started back in 2015, we probably spent 5 months or 6 months of working with attorneys at the city, the county, and here at the university to get this right. And it wasn't enough to just publish data. We needed to be able to accommodate multiple different publishers and do it in a way that doesn't really burden anybody with a legal process. So we have a 2-page data deposit agreement that's up on our site. So anybody that wants to share data with us or through us just needs to complete that 2-page boilerplate agreement. We also ask our publishers to share a license with all their data, and we'll work with them and support them as they make that choice. And so we can take data from any local government. We take data from academic institutions like our own university. And we also take data from nonprofit organizations. So as you go browse our data catalog on WPRDC.org, you'll see all those there. And then, with all of the lawyering that we had involved, we also have a really not necessarily the best user experience, but end user agreement and then the data license. So that governs the use of the data from the end user. So we had to work with our attorneys and kind of make all this happen, and it was tough and challenging, but we were able to make it so that we could, incorporate data from a lot of different folks without a whole lot of additional effort. And so in terms of our technical infrastructure, we manage the open data portal. We use CCAN, and David and Steve will talk more about that. We went through a whole process to make that choice. And we early on heard from a lot of different folks around the country, and the advice that we got was not to focus so much on tools and dashboards and bells and whistles. It was really to put your effort into actually automating a lot of the data feeds. So we have, I think, like 36 or 37 data feeds that we've automated from primarily city and county, but a few other organizations. Some update every 5 minutes, others update hourly or monthly or daily. But that's been a really good lesson for us, and great advice that we got from folks in other cities. And the third piece of our infrastructure is community engagement. And so we are partners in the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership through the Urban Institute. And even for probably 10 years before we launched this project, this is the work that I was doing, is just helping people in the community find and use information. So the roles that NNIP partners like us play in the data intermediary space is help people apply data to achieve impact. And in some cases, a lot of the work that we do is around assembling, transforming, and maintaining data. The second key role of intermediaries, according to NNIP, is to disseminate that information and apply it to achieve impact. So we do that through technical assistance hours. We do consultations, we have classes, we do all sorts of things. And then the third thing around the engagement is using data to strengthen civic capacity and governance. So just kind of being at the table, being part of the process, just being around to help bring data into the process whenever we can. And so we're really grateful to be part of networks like NNIP. And I know our city partners and county partners are part of other networks too, like Civic Analytics Network too. So one of the engagement efforts that we do, and this is where I transition over to Steve, is to talk about how we engage the community. So it's really vital that you do this if you have an open data program. So we just started to do these things called data user groups, and these have been written up in one of the Sunlight Foundation recent guides for tactical data engagement. And so the model's all there. But one of the things we heard in engaging with our property data users a few years ago through one of our user group meetings was, one person said, I'm pretty good with spreadsheets, but I need to link several property data sets to get the full value from open data, and I can't really do that through a spreadsheet, and my computer's not all that great, and I can't handle 550,000 parcel records. So that was one thing that we heard, and Steve will cover how we address that question. And then the other question that we got, or the statement that we got was, somebody who wasn't very confident in using data said, I want to get started with data, but I'm not at all sure how to do it, and I really find computers intimidating. And so with that, we said, well, we're partners with the library. Why don't we look and see if there's anything that's like very entry-level data, confidence-building exercises. We found an example through the MIT Media Lab, Telling Stories and Data Workshop, and this is the next slide. And we just decided to build on top of that and offer a whole series of paper-based, tactile, kind of get experience with data one-on-one class with the Carnegie Library. So we've developed that. We have a whole toolkit. I think that's going to go live real soon. And it's just kind of like you could see a paper-based GIS class that we have where we teach concepts like geocoding and buffers before we put people in front of computers so that when they're ready for that first class in Carto or some of the other tools that are out there, they understand the concepts and it's not nearly as scary. And then, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, who's going to talk, I think, at first how we answer that question about linking data and making it useful.
All right, thanks, Bob. So as Bob had mentioned, we have data from a variety of publishers, and it turns out a lot of that data is focused on properties or parcels. And as he had also mentioned, a lot of our users had a lot of trouble trying to join that data or find it for their specific region. So we followed in the footsteps of Chris Wong at New York City to develop a tool that allows them to select a region, and if you go to the next slide, and then pick whatever data they want for within that region, and then they can download it into a CSV, a GeoJSON, or output it directly to a map with the tool we use, Carto, so that they can, without actually having to dig through very large and numerous data sets, get exactly what they want. Next slide, please. In addition to that, a lot of our users also wanted the ability to just look at individual properties in their neighborhood, their community, to get an idea of either if try and find problem properties or properties that might need assistance. And so the one thing we decided to do was build a just simple property dashboard. And here it has a nice map where they can click on a property, and it shows all the information we have related to that. We also allow them to style the map so that they can use these map styles to help maybe find properties. For example, find properties in their neighborhood that have significantly large number of liens or something like that. And so all of this was built with the back end being CCAN, but since it was a vast number of data sets we were connecting, we built a property API. So if you can go to the next slide. And the property API works where our applications can send a simple request where they just ask for data pertaining to a property, it pulls all the data from our various data sets on CCAN using CCAN's data store API, which is super helpful in itself, and collects all that, puts it together into a nice JSON response so that our applications can take that and display that data to the user.
Okay, so this is David Walker. I'd like to talk about some other problems we've encountered and the solutions we've come up to. One problem we encountered early on was that our publishers, depicted on the upper left, wanted to know how the site was doing, how many people were downloading the data sets, how many people were viewing the data sets, what the breakdown was. They wanted to keep track of all this and understand if their investment was paying off. So initially we were using Google Sheets and going into Google Analytics and pulling stuff out and also keeping track of a variety of other metrics there, because we keep track of things like how many classes at local universities or high schools use our data sets for educational purposes, and the events, the various events that we do in our outreach efforts. So when I started working here, one of my first tasks was to try to synthesize all this into a dashboard that we could use to show our publishers what was going on so they could easily access this information. And so on the left, you see a bar chart that shows the growth in users of the site overall by month. And that can be switched to show page views and other metrics. And on the right is a cropped version of an example of a breakdown by data set. So you can see some of our more popular data sets there, and there are sparkline bar charts that show you how many downloads each of those data sets got per month. And there are various other metrics that we track. Next slide, please. So the previous thing that I showed you, the performance dashboard, was based upon the R-Shiny framework. This was suggested to us by our partners, the city of Pittsburgh, because they've had a lot of success using open data to, initially they started generating dashboards for internal use. So the police wanted to have information about, wanted to have a map showing crimes and incidents, and other departments wanted this as well. And then they realized that they, as part of publishing open data, they could make public versions available that didn't include all of the information. And they were doing this through the R-Shiny framework. And as they've gone on and done this, they've built on our CCAN platform a lot, and also a particular API that Steve has built, previously mentioned, to provide a lot of property information. Next slide, please. So another problem we encountered in trying to track the downloads and various metrics for their performance dashboard was that sometimes data sets disappear. The CSV file is there, it's there, it's there, and then poof, in a cloud of smoke, it can disappear. And the fact that the dashboard didn't initially account for that could have been routed around, but this was an opportunity to deal with another underlying problem, which is that the CCAN harvest extension we use, which we use to pull in a lot of our data sets from ArcGIS servers, is configured so that every month, or every week actually, when it reharvests the ArcGIS servers, it deletes all the resources, throwing away the resource IDs, and generates new ones. And that completely throws off the dashboard. So we created this data set tracker, and this is something that's fairly new, and it's going to help to join together these resources so we can see really what's going on, even if somebody accidentally deletes something and then recreates it with the same file name. We'll be able to see over the entire existence of the real resource how it has been doing, how many people have used it. And so this is just a simple Python script at this point. Eventually, it could be advanced. It could use CCAN trigger functionality, and it could be made into a CCAN extension. There are probably advantages to doing those things. But right now, it's only been in development for a short period of time. And so what it does is it runs as a cron job, runs periodically. It does a scan. It just pulls the data.json file. And it also uses the CCAN API to get other information. And it keeps all of this in a giant JSON file, which eventually is going to be stored instead on CCAN, since that's the same thing we did with the performance dashboard. We like the idea of storing all of our metrics as data sets that we publish. So then when this Python script, this data set tracker, finds something that's of interest, it sends us a notification. So it finds, oh, a new data set was created. And this is something that can happen sometimes, and we're not aware of it because we have many publishers who all have the ability to add new data sets whenever they want to. And usually we're on top of these things, but occasionally they sneak up on us. Or something else might happen. Maybe a data set is deleted. Maybe a link goes dead. So this can easily go through and scan for all these things and then send a little paper airplane message to our Slack channel, and Steve and I get notifications. Next slide, please. So this is the last one. It's solving a similar kind of problem and might eventually be rolled up into the previous one. But the problem is one that comes up a lot more often, and that is we are told by publishers or occasionally by users that they are looking at the metadata information for our data set, and we have pretty good metadata. We usually have the publishing frequency, which you can see at the bottom of the metadata, and in the middle there's the modified timestamp, which is standard. And if those are out of sync, if that modified timestamp says it was last published in December and it's now January, and the frequency publishing is daily, we're probably going to get a complaint from somebody. Previously, we've had, this happens occasionally, and then we have to go and find out why did the ETL job break, and fix whatever is broken. But now that we have this little script running, it's sending us notifications, and we can find out before anybody else that the ETL job is broken and fix it. And that's a tiny little thing. It's much more mature than the dataset tracker, and it's also available on GitHub. So this concludes our part of the talk. Yes, and we're available for questions now.
Thank you, Team WPRDC. It's amazing the kind of innovation you guys have built over the years, and this is exactly why I'm so excited about a true platform where people can really build with each other and collaborate and all these things. So we have a few questions. So the first question I have here is for the WPRDC team. Is all the code that you mentioned, are they all open source as well?
Yes, everything that, everything that I've made, and I'm very sure everything David's made, is available on GitHub. It's just /WPRDC. Anything we use, any tools we use are open source. I think we pretty much slap an MIT license on anything we make. I know I do. I think Dave does as well. So,
Great.
Yeah. Awesome. Anybody who's interested can certainly go there, and we welcome feedback.
Yeah.
Great.
And pull requests.
And pull requests.
Hi, this is Bert in Hawaii. I'm definitely impressed by, what you folks have done, and was kind of curious going back to the slide that has, regional open data. How successful has this model been extended to other regions?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I know there are a few in the UK that we've looked at. I know Connecticut Open Data is one that's kind of a state level community data platform that we talk to the folks up there pretty often. Open Data Philly is more of a data catalog, but they're also this distributed, federated system. But we've talked to people from probably 30 cities now that are really interested in the model, have had follow-up conversations with several. I know Greensboro, North Carolina, has actually written a report and kind of looking at this from their university and how they can be involved in things. So there's a lot of interest in this, and I think we're continuing to talk to folks about this kind of collaborative open data model, because it makes sense when you think about the scale of problems, and if you don't have data scaled to the scale of the size of the problem or the geographic scope of the problem, you're probably not going to solve it efficiently.
So I guess my $1 million question is, how did you guys get funded?
We got support from two local foundations, Richard King Mellon and the Heinz Endowments, to get started. They also supported work at the city and county to actually build their data teams and their data pipelines. And now we're actually looking at what's our long-term sustainability strategy. So we're working on that a lot to transition away from, foundation support. We also get a lot of support here from the University of Pittsburgh. They've been a really good home to us. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at that model right now of, how do we get everybody to contribute a little bit so that we can continue to do the work that we do. So if anybody out there wants to point us to things or things that they're thinking about, if they're thinking about this model, we'd be happy to talk.
Well, Bob, I think I probably talked to you a while back, trying to figure out how could we do something like that in Hawaii. And I think, funding is always obviously going to be a challenge, and just finding the right stakeholders that would commit that kind of resource to making this facility available. And, it's really, like I said, it's really impressive what you folks have done. And, there's all these universities now that are, I got a chance to go to the University of Chicago, and they had their data science for social good, and everybody's, looking at data sets that are available to help solve some problems. And I think we're trying to do that, something similar here in Hawaii. But, in terms of a regional data center that could support that effort, it's very, very piecemeal out here.
Yeah, I know, like a lot of communities, like I know our friends in San Antonio are having these community collaborative conversations about this. And I think like that's the first way that these start, is people just start talking to each other, and then they start to think about the pieces that need to be put in place and how they could scrabble things or assemble mm-hmm. things. And it doesn't have to be like you start big and you start flashy. You can iterate on this. You could say, we're going to play with CCAN, and we're going to see if we can set up an instance of CCAN. And, you see how that goes. And then that may lead you to more conversations. And you learn a lot from that process. So I would say, like, don't think you have to start big and start with a grant. Just start by talking to your friends locally and stay tapped into things that are happening nationally. And we're always happy to talk. We write as many blog posts as we can as well. So.
I have a follow-up question, Bob. You mentioned CCAN, and what factors led to you choosing CCAN, and what do you think would you like it to have going forward? Because one of the goals of this, the reboot of the US Open Knowledge Network, is to get this community backlog so we can all work together and share these innovations with each other.
Yeah, we had the advantage of kind of moving late. And so we could see what happened in a lot of other cities. We didn't get launched until 2015 late. So what we did is we went through a whole process and said, let's evaluate the different technologies that are out there alongside, what our needs are and what our structure looks like and what our region looks like. So we pulled together our friends from different universities, the city, the county as well. And we just kind of put out some criteria and asked for, some submissions in an RFP, or not RFP, RFI process. I'm sorry, got my letters mixed up. So we looked at things like, what's the impact on our sustainability? Can we, add additional publishers without any additional costs? What are the functions and features? How much can we actually change the product if there are needs or things that we see that we want to improve? Looking at usability and looking at the vendor space, and if we need help, were there enough folks out there? And if we decided to switch gears and go to a completely different model or product, how do we get the data out? What's it going to cost us? So all those kind of things went into our process. We have a blog post up on our site that details all that with a lot of supplemental info. But I'll turn the question about what we'd like to see in CCAN over to David and Steve.
Yeah, I guess I'll just start with something that we're about to have pretty soon. We currently don't have, and that is making all of our data sets that involve geospatial data truly geospatially aware, so that we can index them by geography. So you can do simple spatial queries like things that exist, like find out the crimes that exist within this neighborhood through geometry, and very quickly receive that the answer to that query. And that's one thing I know that we're working on adding to ours. I'm very excited to see how that goes, because it'll make a lot of tools that we could possibly make for our users a lot easier to build.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think we're planning on at the same time trying to provide a standardized time field. So data sets come with time, date times, all kinds of different formats. And I think our solution to that is going to be just to append an extra column that has a WPRDC standard time format, ISO format, I suppose. I think the answer to the question a few months ago of what we would like to see in CCAN would have been the elimination of messy tables, because messy tables, the CCAN, which I'll explain a little bit to be sure everybody knows. If you try to upload data to CCAN, it will try to guess the type of the fields based upon a small random sample of each field, and it's sometimes wrong. And when it's wrong, it can break your upload at some random point whenever it encounters the wrong type, and then you don't know about it. So we don't like that, but the good news is that OpenGov has, I believe it's OpenGov entirely, has, Joel, you can comment on this, has produced a solution for this. The Express Loader, which is much faster, there's a blog post about this, and has a lot of advantages. And together with some work done by the Open Knowledge Foundation on data validation, we're going to have much nicer ETL jobs in the future that don't break the way they used to. Joel, do you want to say anything about the Express Loader?
Yeah, and that was a really painful problem. I mean, sometimes it's looking back, the fact that they call it messy tables still was kind of funny. But yeah, so now we solved it. Originally, we solved it, taking your use case and Boston's use case, and really address that pain and scratch that itch, and now it's part of the ecosystem. So it's widely available not only to installations that we help maintain, but to the whole ecosystem, Express Loader. So yeah.
So
I have a.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few more things about what we would like. I think you saw some of the things that we've built: the performance dashboard, the data set tracker. These are all things that potentially CCAN extensions. So I think some of the functionality that's in there, for instance, you can't find out the size of a CCAN file in the file store through the API at all, as far as I can tell. And that's something that would be nice to know if you want to know, for instance, like, how much bandwidth has the site used? If it's down, you've had 500 downloads of this particular resource this month. What does that add up to? So these are additional things we would like to see in CCAN's future.
Right. I mean, that's one goal again of the US Open Knowledge Network is we'll expose all these requirements and all these things so we can all work on it together. As is, OpenGov is investing a lot in some of these features to traceability and measuring demand and metrics and instrumenting CCAN. So yeah.
Being able to was the key part of our decision process too. So we're really happy with the direction that we want.
That's great. I have a question here for Oscar.
Sure.
Oscar, the question is, we've been talking about CCAN a lot. What other activities are there in the U.S.? There's a very large community, but they're right now, it's an organic ecosystem. What other open knowledge activities of note are there in the U.S. that you can share?
I guess if you are thinking about, for example, open access, I know that the Creative Commons groups have done a lot of work around it. There's the Sunlight Foundation. They are working on their cities program on developing a new open data census for this year, which they are mixing with the activities on promoting open data in general in different cities. They are also organizing an Open Data Day event on March 3rd in Washington, D.C., in case anyone is near there and wants to attend the Open Data Day meeting they're organizing. And I guess, yeah, there's also the Wikimedia people that are doing a lot of work on, and some universities as well, that used to belong to the GLAM project we had, but that ever since the working group stopped being a working group, they have been doing things by themselves. So I don't have an exhaustive list right now, but maybe we can continue this discussion of mapping actors in the U.S. Through the forum, and I think that would be a good place to have all the information we need.
Great. Any other questions before we transition to, that's a good segue actually into, you mentioned the forum, Oscar. Let me just see if there are any other questions from the attendees. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. If we can move to the next slide. So I'm glad you mentioned, it's a good segue. You know, I mentioned briefly that we'll have to really frame this re-energized US Open Knowledge Network is we'll have this monthly webinar series. So we have some speakers lined up. I'm not, cannot disclose them yet, but they're a big player in the open data ecosystem. But it will be March 1, just the weekend before Open Data Day, and hopefully we can learn some things about another related project, data packages in the Frictionless Data Initiative, which, you know, of course, WPRDC is also leading the charge there with some pilots for data validation that was mentioned earlier. And I want a call to action. You know, this is our first webinar, and I really, Bert and I look forward to engaging the community online. Oscar was nice enough to create a little home for us in the discussokfn.org forum. It's still fairly empty. We will start populating in, not just with this presentation and the recording of it, but also some other things, one of which is an open call to ideas for things that the community wants to talk about, open data, open science, you know, all the other projects in terms of how to really create open knowledge in your different communities. We'll also have a survey there shortly. For those who registered for the webinar, you can expect an invite to fill out the survey about your feedback, not just about this webinar, but your ideas in terms of building up capacity here in the US as we work on this goal of open knowledge for better outcomes in civil society. Any last few words, Oscar, and from the WPRDC team?
No, I just want to say thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about the project. It's always nice to connect with folks around the country and even bigger.
Yes, and look forward to facilitating it, and I, you know, hopefully everybody takes the time to fill out the survey and give us and share us your ideas, and hopefully even nominate topics for future webinars. Thank you, everyone.
Joel, I do want to thank you very much for you know, getting this started and having the commitment to, you know, make it a recurring event. And I think it's going to be I think beneficial to all of the participants that are interested in open knowledge, especially in the U.S. I do want to follow up with you. I'll do it offline, you know, regarding CCAN and maybe we as Open Knowledge US can help with, I just got back from Tunisia, and they're definitely interested in CCAN, and they have a whole open data initiative there, and maybe there's ways that we could help them move that initiative forward. So I'll talk to you offline about that.
Great. And I'm looking forward to working with you, Bert, as we try to build up the community here in the U.S. and the rest of the people here at WPRDC. I think, and link arms with other organizations who are working towards this common goal. Thank you once again, and see you next month, March 1. Save the date. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mahalo.
Thank you.